and welcome to this episode of the Skift Meetings podcast, the podcast for curious event professionals embracing the future of business events. My name is Andrea Doyle, and I am the executive editor of Skift Meetings. In this episode, titled Venturing Beyond Boundaries, I have the pleasure of speaking with Joe Rivers, Director of Experiences and Partnerships for the Czarnowski Collective, a group of studios that have come together to provide event production, fabrication, and trade show agency services. Rivers shares with us his journey to becoming an event professional, how chance led him to the events industry, the importance of why, how risk-taking can be a good thing, and how gratitude is an emotion that has helped him throughout his life. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation, and I invite you to check out other episodes of the Skift Meetings podcast with tips and insights from today's most influential event professionals. You can find all of our episodes on our website or subscribe through your favorite podcast service.
My name's Joe Rivers. I work for Czarnowski Collective. This collective is a group of different studios that have come together. Czarnowski, the name, is the heritage of it originated in Chicago about 70 plus years ago as more of an I&D and labor company, and it evolved into event production, fabrication, as well as kind of a trade show, agency, if you will. And over the years, we've evolved into that stance of being someone who has the fabrication and the production capabilities globally, It also meant that we needed to evolve with the industry. And so we've acquired different studios, one of which called Public School, which is a creative studio, and then another one called Assembly, which is a temporary tent structure, like the ones you see at the PGA Tour or any tennis matches, and then another one called Infusion, which is a digital studio. So all of those make up the collective, but it's very strong in that fabrication production sense with all those other little facets that we can specialize in.
And you're Director of Experiences and Partnerships for the collective.
Correct, with an emphasis on business development, because that has been my forte in the last five years. Director of experiences, I like to say, because I'm quite an advocate for our industry. Something that, again, I'd like to point out that Monique Ruffbell and Nicola are unofficial mentors of mine, if you will, and ones that have definitely seen my potential and my advocacy for experiential marketing. I have another couple other mentors, ones I actually work with now, and one of his names is Phil Schlitz, and he's always been someone that plucked me off of what my previous life was that got me into experiential, actually. And so that's why I'm such this advocate for experiential and tying it back into the Czarnowski Collective, which in turn, hopefully more brands and agencies are able to see that value prop that we give.
So do you plan events?
We plan, we produce, we execute.
Okay.
We can do the metrics afterwards, and we do all the design and creative prior as well. I don't like to say we're full service. I do not like those words when we talk about agencies. At least from my point of view, I think when people always say full service, they don't fully understand what that always means. Mm-hmm. But I do believe that from a holistic approach, you can say, hey, we're able to cover these different things, and we're able to do a certain thing very, very well.
So why don't you tell us about your journey as an event professional?
I am happy to, because that is one that I love to say it's unorthodox, and I do. I don't want to sound like a typical millennial by saying my journey was different, but I do want to say that when I graduated college, I never knew about experiential. I never knew about the event world other than them teaching you it in some marketing classes and saying, hey, this is engagement marketing. This is planning events, and there's just so much more to that. I just didn't know, and I graduated and I went down to New York City to try my hand at traditional advertising. Didn't enjoy it. Moved back to upstate New York and Buffalo, New York. And I thought to myself, boy, I really want to travel the world. I never really got to do that in my life up until I was 22 years old. And I really want to see the world. How do I do that and also tie into making money and being, in the world of marketing? I had someone that told me to be a brand ambassador for a local gig, for a local project, and it kind of evolved into doing different brand ambassador opportunities. And then I evolved into being a tour manager where I would be a liaison between the agency and the brand that their client, where they needed someone to be on the road, go to the events, talk to the consumers, and educate people on the campaign itself. And that's what I did for about 4 years, where I was a tour manager. I was an MC for the Budweiser Clydesdales. It was interesting. There was a lot of adventures. There's that the fact that I can say that I've now ventured to about 36 states. And in between those tours, I would also have that passion for travel kind of bleed into my personal life. And I wanted to backpack overseas. And now I can say I've been to 29 countries and I continue to want to explore because it evokes that passion further of experiential marketing and travel.
What does it entail being an MC for the Clydesdale horses?
Yeah, that was fun. That was an interesting one. Going to rodeos and then like talking about like how they're treated. They're treated like royalty, which they are. You know what I mean? So it's pretty fascinating. Yeah, but like there's other ones where I would be a tour manager for Cupcake Vineyards Wine, where it was a mobile bar that you could just like do wine on tap, and people would people would have this really amazing experience at a food and wine festival, to a music festival, to a retail shop. And people are, I think that's what captivated it for me. It's what captivated the love of what we do in experiential. And I mean to tie events and pop-ups and retail. Like I like to tie all of that into experiential because of what it does for people, and it provides an emotional connection.
When did you first encounter business events?
When I transitioned into more of the business development side, and kind of more of the full time coming over to the side of the world that you're producing these large scale conferences, these large scale events. And it was more of a, hey, get off the road as like a carny, if you will, and come into the real world of like B2B events, and even kind of supporting the B2C events. So it was around 2019 when I moved to New York City, that second time, but the one that stuck for about 4 or 5 years, to really understand, look, there's this whole other level of what you do in experiential, and that's doing business events and all sorts of things.
How do you explain to friends and family what you do?
I've stopped. I've stopped. I've stopped explaining. I used to always tell people, plan events and go and be a part of these experiences that are popping up around the country or the world. A lot of times family and friends who have no idea what that is thinks of you as either a wedding planner or someone who, and you're just like, you're so far from the truth. That's okay. I just go and travel to different events, and I hope the people that I'm representing or that I'm working with are having a good experience. And what I've always liked to say nowadays, closer to being in my age of 33, is the people that are going to these events, whether it's a trade show, whether it's a conference, whether it's a festival and it has an activation there, you're providing an experience for the people that don't do what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. So if someone is a travel nurse and has no idea what I'm doing, that travel nurse who's maybe going to this pop-up or going to this trade show for work, we're the ones who are behind that. We get to provide that experience for those people who have no idea the behind the scenes type of work that we're doing. And I think that's a really admirable thing when you tie in like kind of your whole existence of what we're doing here.
So you're the magic behind the curtain almost.
To a certain degree, not in a hey, look at, stroke the ego type thing, but more of a like, hey, wow, you're providing something for someone, just like how that travel nurse is providing something for someone too.
So you specialize in how brands bring their stories to life through experiential activations. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think bringing an experiential activation to life requires a little bit more of an in-depth analysis that a brand is looking to do, right? When I talk to brands or any individuals in the experiential space, I like to ask why. I like to ask, why are you doing this? And you know what? That should go for anything in the advertising and marketing field, by the way. It probably should when you're thinking of a traditional marketing campaign or a social media campaign. But when it comes to experiential, we like to ask why. Why are you going to South by Southwest that happens in Austin, Texas? Why are you going to the Consumer Electronics Show that happens in Vegas? Why are you doing your own developers or user conference that you're just doing as a pop-up somewhere in Montana, if you will? Well, you have to think of that why, because they have to understand, who are you trying to target? What are you trying to convey in an event, as well as what's what's the end result going to be? Do you have a pre-event planning or phase that you'd like to implement and execute? What is going to happen during the event, and then post event? What is it that you're trying to also, again, convey, attract, nurture, engage your consumers or your audience?
What are some of the best activations that you've seen recently?
Andrea, that's a good question. I know that's a fantastic question. I'm trying to
So
think
you
of.
recently were at South by Southwest. I saw some of
Yeah.
your LinkedIn posts, which I found really interesting.
Thank you. I find that it's really great to be someone that, again, is like that advocate for experiential. So when you do those recaps, I hope it provides either A, value, or B, the ability for anyone who wasn't able to go to kind of live through that to a certain degree. When I can when I can answer that question with the type of examples I saw, one of my favorites, and I will say that, was the Tide experience at South by Southwest. I thought Tide came in, Procter and Gamble, one of Tide, one of Tide being one of Procter and Gamble's, obviously infamous brands, and one that has a lot of value toward household names. How can they show up at South by Southwest, which is a film, music, comedy, and technology event, that transforms the city of Austin, Texas? How do they come in and make an impact? Well, I had no idea. And so when I heard about it, I was like, I want to stop by. I want to stop by the Tide experience and see what it's about. Just a little side note on the question of what's some of my favorites. I always like to understand that what makes an experiential campaign or an activation truly immersive and captivating enough to make it impactful is how it engages all five senses. So that
Okay.
I want to preface that, because when I walked through Tide, I immediately got the sense of smell engaged by smelling the cleanliness of Tide, right? You're walking through and you could just tell the whole space is just this clean atmosphere, just based on the smell of itself. And so afterwards, when you're walking through, and I naturally just want to go up and talk to like one of the brand ambassadors to get the whole understanding of this activation. And the gentleman there said, "Oh yeah, well, Tide's R&D department actually flew in from Cincinnati, and you could literally go up to this bar, quote unquote, a bar, where you could then try out the new Tide Pod that they are releasing. It's like this synthetic Tide Pod that, as when you put in a glass of water, obviously being in the wash, it'll get rid of any stain." Now, the bar was interactive where you actually got to touch and feel and use that sense, where I could use some tongs, grab the Tide Pod, put it into a glass of water. I used chili powder, chili, like pepper sauce or something, to put on like a little piece of fabric, and then you put it into the glass of water with the Tide Pod, and you actually got to see it work in real time, and it took that stain out of the fabric. And I thought to myself, what an easy, simplistic activation, interactive element to this pop-up. Yet it impacted me, where I was like, wow, I'm going to talk about this. Now it's 3 weeks later and I'm still talking about it. Like that's important.
Any other activations or events outside of South by Southwest that really struck a chord with you?
Yes, I have gone to the Consumer Electronics Show for many years now, right? That happens in Las Vegas. It's on the forefront of all the newest tech, the newest gadgets, and brands are showing up all over the place, right? I find it interesting that there's also the immersive experiences that are popping up in Vegas as well. And one of them being Meow Wolf. Meow Wolf to me is magnificent with what they've done by having their space at Area 15 and then evolving into the ones in Denver, Dallas, and uh, well, the original one, which is in Santa Fe, New Mexico. But it's truly immersive environments. I've been to the one in Vegas a handful of times, and the Czarnowski Collective, we brought a handful of people to Area 15 and granted them the ability to go into Meow Wolf, called Omega Mart in Vegas, and it's just a beautiful space of multi-sensory engagements, from feel, touch, sight, sound. It's just massively interactive. And it really touches each part of you to saying like, okay, what is this? Why did I enjoy that? And then different areas doing the same thing. So that's one of my favorite ones. I would like to also kind of side note and mention another that is a Czarnowski Collective project and event that we did, and that was for Panasonic at the Consumer Electronics Show this past year, where while the space completely sustainability focused and showcasing the different products, there was this interactive part that really struck a chord with me, and it was a partnership with this anamorphic viral sensation called Lenny the Blob. Not sure if you've ever heard of Lenny the Blob, but it is this account on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube that it's just this animated cartoon who's an advocate for mental health and bringing awareness of mental health. And Panasonic wanted to utilize this partnership and say, "Hey, Lenny the Blob, be at Panasonic. We have this massive screen that people could then go up and speak into a microphone and talk to Lenny and ask a question." And it was a really cool way to like showcase, okay, Panasonic's embracing this amazing, viral sensation. But then on the flip side too, people were at the Consumer Electronics Show asking questions, kind of being like, "Oh, I'm a little nervous to go up there and ask something of like this animated thing." But at the same time, it's such a crazy and busy time that it's like really good to like take a step back and ask a question that could have a simple answer or a really complex answer. And Lenny the Blob would try to answer with something fun, supportive, and engaging.
So you mentioned the importance of engaging all the senses. Do you have any examples of multi-sensory activations and how brands can do such a thing without a really, really steep budget?
Yeah, I do, and it's gonna sound a little funny because Czarnowski Collective was responsible for the Porsche experience that was recent at South by, but I used that one because I really, really enjoyed there was an element to the whole space. There was an element that I loved and I showcased that every person that I was providing a tour for, going through the whole thing. And it was the Porsche full service activation, it was called. It was very much inspired for the journey on the road, Route 66 vibes, like all that. But there was one element that I thought was that tied to the level of multi-sensory, but it was so simplistic, Andrea. It was so simplistic. It was 5 doors, and each door you would open up, and there would be a sensory engagement that would tie back to the vehicle. So, example being, door number 2 would open up, and it would be all the different fabrics of the vehicle that you could then touch and use the sense of touch. Door number 4 had a bunch of air fresheners that was the sense of smell of the Porsche vehicle, to door number 3 being a bunch of exhaust pipes that would have the sound of the Porsche engine and you could hear it. And I thought each sense was engaged in such a simple atmosphere of opening up one door and it was just a wall of that engagement. It wasn't crazy, but it was thoughtful because it was engaging each sense in a really important way.
So then these activations don't have to cost a great deal of money. It sounds like they just need creativity.
A lot of times it really does boil down to that. I mean, of course, you look at certain things and you go, of course, that was going to cost a ton, whether it was from the sponsorship level down to the creative process all the way to the fabrication and so on. Totally understandable. And then there's other elements that you go, wow, that was, a partnership with Lenny the Blob or some type of, multi-sensory environment like what Meow Wolf does. You go, wow, it doesn't have to be this grandiose thing. It just has to be thoughtful, evoke an emotion that hopefully is cathartic to the end user, and then do something that's going to be like a long lasting impression, which is usually through the senses.
So you mentioned really cool activations. Have you been to any business events lately that really impressed you?
I'm thinking, Andrea. I would say when I think of a business event and I go to an activation, I actually want to mention the one that I just went to last week in San Francisco, and it's called the ABPM conference, right? It was called the ABPM Spring Conference, and it's all about briefing centers. So we have these innovation centers, and there's these briefing centers that brands have all over the world, right? Microsoft has tons of them. Dell, any Silicon Valley company usually has a briefing center, right? How do you tie in something at a conference like that to showcase what the brand is doing from a briefing center, an innovation center, and then B, how do you allow people to come in and have that really cool engagement that you get at those consumer events, right? Well, what ABPM did and has done, this has been going on now for several years, for a couple decades actually, they've been doing it. But what they've been really kind of leaning into is on day number 3 of the conference, you get a tour of a local innovation center of your choosing. So, some brands said you could go, I think it was Google and HP. You split up a day if you chose those brands, and you got to go see the Google one and you got to go see the HP one. And you got to go actually see and experience their innovation center, right? I chose the Microsoft one because I was very intrigued by it. It was a state-of-the-art one that was pretty much planned and built during COVID. So I was just intrigued. And it was an entire day tour, day number 3, entire day tour of the innovation center that they have. It's about 1 out of 58, if I remember correctly, that they have around the globe. And it was 643,000 square feet of space that is just intrinsically about Microsoft, their products, their offerings, and then like where the advancement, where the growth is that Microsoft is going. And that was multisensory. And I thought to myself, what an awesome way to end a conference by the things that you're talking about, you actually provide a tour or a walkthrough of the very thing that everyone's getting information.
So it brought it to life.
Yeah, I have to say, you go to events and you go to different, and then not every single event is able to do this. I totally understand and respect that. But what I love, and again, the unofficial mentor, Monique, with what they're doing with TED, where they have different engagements that isn't just talking to you're hearing from a panelist, or just doing a little dinner thing. It's like a networking session. It's more powerful than that. It's providing something that's a little bit more intimate, but also like useful based on the knowledge you're just gaining at that conference.
Because you actually get to mingle with the speakers versus
Yeah.
just listen to them on the stage.
100%. I got to go up to the person who was in charge of like the culinary aspect of the Microsoft Center, and I just wanted to let her know. I was like, this was amazing. I mean, thank you so much for everything, but also this was amazing that you guys got to like bring us through. And it just made me appreciate the ABPM community even more too. I want to touch on that because it allowed the community of the event, the association as well, to showcase, wow, what a really cool aspect of things.
Wow. How do you see events changing in the next 5 years?
I have to say, if I see events changing in the next 5 years, it's going to be more geared toward individual experiences. So you see events like Adobe Summit, right? Or how Google I/O has theirs, or now more and more brands are holding their own festival, if you will, BravoCon or something like that, right? I keep seeing more and more brands want to hold their own IP. I keep seeing more companies want to embrace having something that their community, that their audience, their target demographic are the ones that want to go to that specific event. And if I may, I'd like to say if a brand holds their own event or their own experience, someone if I'm a fan of Apple, let's just say, because I'm using a MacBook, and Apple's holding their own event, of course I'm going to go there. I have a dear friend who is a Tesla owner and someone who loves Tesla. He will go to an announcement that's a Tesla only thing, but he'll make his way to go to that, put it on his calendar, traverse there, and do that event. And I thought that's amazing because you're already an automatic a brand ambassador of that brand because you have such a close association with it. Of course, you're going to want to go to the event. So I would say that that's already kind of happening, but we're going to see more and more of it over the course of the next few years.
So instead of Tesla having an activation, say at a big auto show, they have their own event.
100%. And we're seeing that a lot of times with the automotive industry, where they're not always going to the auto shows. They're maybe being part of a cultural event or having their own kind of siloed experience that they're allowing for their audience. Another perfect example is what Delta Airlines is doing. They are on the forefront of creating membership experiences, right? So if you're a member, Sky Miles member, you're getting more of a curated experience at different events that they're doing, right? They were just at South by and they perfected that right when you got off the plane, because I flew Delta. They greeted you at the airport. Now, that was a very, very the whole thing was curated and it was really special and you felt special. At the same time, they're doing that and they're embracing it, right? They're moving forward over the next years as it keeps going, that they want to tie together memberships, members, experiences, and then hopefully long-lasting loyalty.
It's interesting you say that because I am working on a story about the fact that trade shows are being impacted by exhibitors. Instead of exhibiting at this specific trade show, they'll do their own event. So they're not in every single trade show because they're taking some of their resources to create something just for themselves.
Yeah, and it's not to say, I mean, trade shows are highly impactful and necessary. Really, they are. They're actually quite necessary, but there's also that element of how do you use what you're doing at a trade show, because sometimes it's just the parameters that you have in place on a trade show floor, whereas maybe you can do something else in a different capacity, creatively. Maybe the story can be different. That's something I learned at the experiential summit last year, of like, when you're telling a story, there's just so many, there's a theme, there's the stakes, and there's the arc, and brands are leaning into that of like, let's tell this story. And the only way you can kind of do that sometimes is having a blank canvas and creating it from the ground up.
Because those are the stories that resonate.
Correct.
If you could change one thing in the events industry, what would it be?
Oh, risk taking. I have found sometimes, and you know what? I'm not on the brand side, so I'm going to preface that the fact that sometimes there's just things you have to do because that makes sense from a brand guidelines, and that's what that's kind of the path you have to take, right? Path of least resistance too. So I understand that, and I want to preface that. However, there's a lot of times where something riskier, quote unquote, is actually the thing that'll be the way more impactful, right? I've always been someone that says that there's four emotions in this world that everyone experiences, and that's love, fear, hope, and nostalgia, right? And all of them are pretty true, and they always kind of tie into one another or individual. But when I say that, like, there's an activation or there's a multisensory experience or there's a trade show and it conveys one of those emotions or all of them, someone took the time to say, hey, this is going to be a risky thing. It doesn't mean it has to be a bad risk. I think risk gets a negative connotation to it. There could be a really, really good risk that you're taking right now that's going to convey those emotions, that's going to drive business, that's going to create loyalty and brand exposure. And I think that's something that our industry needs to embrace a little bit more of. And you see it all the time with agencies. There's agencies that are always just, taking a chance or putting their best foot forward and saying, look, this is what we think is going to work. And that's the point. And that's kind of why we're in marketing too, is to take that risk.
And taking a chance, is that important to you?
I think so. I think it's important, not just from a business standpoint or professional standpoint. It feels like if you don't do that, you don't always yield the best results, right? You take a risk, and sometimes you could have the best thing that's ever happened to you.
And I find it interesting that the four emotions you mentioned were love, hope, fear, and nostalgia. Nostalgia is an interesting one.
Yeah, I like to reference back to, which makes me sound like I'm a true ad guy, which I don't want to seem like that, but like I reference back to that scene in Mad Men when Don Draper's presenting the Kodak carousel and he's doing the pitch, and you could tell he's getting emotional because up on the screen showcasing the product of the carousel are the photos of his family, right? And it's showing like when he's got married and his family and the journey of the carousel, what it means. And then at the very end of the scene, the lights flicker on, and you see that the clients that are in the room are getting teary-eyed and like are almost like, what did I just watch? And one of Don Draper's colleagues in the room goes, good luck at your next meeting, knowing how powerful that emotion of nostalgia, especially from the point of view of the person pitching it, by providing that story, again, that story and that emotion. And I was like, wow, tie that into anything. I mean, it's a powerful emotion. It really is.
What future trends are you most excited about for the industry?
I want to say there's a few different trends, right? One of them I'm noticing more so are going off the beaten path, if you will. I think there's a lot of brands and agencies alike working, cohesively about how do you stand out, but like not by having this like massive thing that pops up in the middle of downtown, which you can do, of course, but maybe you do something like off the beaten path. If you're at South by, what does it mean by going to a different area of the city? There's a notoriously and quite fantastic activation that's always been known around South by, and it was what HBO did with Westworld about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was where you had to charter onto the bus or you go onto the bus and you charter yourself to the experience that was not within the city limits, and it was a whole entire town that was pretty much built from scratch of Westworld, and it won awards and it did amazing and rightfully so, especially to the team behind it and everything. But I thought to myself, well, that was something that was shown like 6 years ago, but now you're starting to see it a little bit more. And this isn't about just consumer events. I think it's important when you go to a business event like a trade show or anything really, and you're kind of seeing like hotel takeovers. There's someone that's going and doing like a hotel takeover that's off the beaten path, or there's some type of pop-up experience that's down the road and you've never even heard of where it is, but you want to go check it out.
What is your stance on the current AI evolution?
AI is interesting. I've had the opportunity to go to some events in the last year that every time I go to it, guess what's on the forefront there? The Cannes Line Festival of Creativity, to CES, all the way to more like industry focused events such as Fast Company Innovation Festival, right? They're all talking and discussing AI. I think there's a component of it that's amazing. And it's not going to take people's jobs. If anything, what you do is you try to spark that thing that AI, everyone keeps saying it's going to take their job, or it's going to maybe disrupt the creativity in our field or in our business. But if anything, why don't you let it spark that inspiration instead of letting it disrupt you? And I mean disrupt in a more of a traditional sense,
Mhm.
where it's, if you use AI and you see what it can do for you, like on a either a day-to-day basis for different admin tasks, all the way to when I was creating a storyboard for the memoir I wrote recently, I wanted to created. I wanted it to help me understand what that storyboard was going to look like. But also, it gave me inspiration when I tied in saying, I'm from Buffalo, right? So I'm a Buffalo Bills fan. And I said, well, it would be really interesting if PepsiCo did an activation with the Buffalo Bills. Can you draw up an image of what that would look like? Obviously, it's not going to give me like what our designers and our creators are going to give us, but it'll give that little dose of inspiration to say, wow, this is what it could potentially be. And that's where I see I see the advancements and the advantages of AI doing that.
But no fear it will ever replace jobs in our field, in the events industry.
And not to tie back that to those four emotions, but fear is one of those emotions, and rightfully so. You could have that fear. I totally agree that it's probably something to be cognizant about. That it can be a possibility. There are definitely companies that are willing to embrace the AI revolution to save costs, or eliminate personnel. And there's different things that's a nature of reality of like what we're doing right now, right? At the same time, there's a lot of opportunity too. And it's not to be a glass half full guy. It's just that's where you look at an opportunity, you go, I'm gonna lean in on that, or I'm gonna try to articulate how it'll be best served moving forward.
Did you learn anything during the COVID pandemic that you use today or that you would like to share?
Yes, probably a lot. uh, if I may, I have to answer that in two categories, right?
Sure.
One being on a personal standpoint, it was a very hard time for a lot of people. Now, clearly, some people like there was a lot of negative things that associate with the pandemic. One thing was that I realized was how short and limited time we have,
Mm.
right? And it made me kind of really dive deeper into, boy, you really should evaluate, your friendships, your relationships, just everything, because it's so temporary. And I follow stoicism to a T. I believe in it quite a bit, that the philosophy of it. And it is very much it got me through the pandemic. I got to be with my parents for a little bit. I have nieces and nephew, and I got to spend time with them in the limited capacity that I could. And I have a lot of friends who invited me in when it was most dire for me, because as someone in the event and experiential industry, my whole life was disrupted. And that's where it goes to the second category of, you really got to see that even though it was important during that time to be isolated and to think of your others in your community, we are social creatures by nature. We need to be around other people. It's where you elevate yourself. It's where you learn about yourself, and it's where you get a sense of a community that you're in. And it was really important for me to realize that even though during that time we couldn't do it, I knew coming out of the pandemic, people wanted to get together. And you're seeing that more so now than ever with the way the experience economy is being, utilized and blown up. It's everywhere. People want to travel and go. We have a 99% occupancy rate for Airbnbs here in Buffalo, because that's where the totality of for the eclipse is.
Wow.
And I was like, there's people literally traveling from all over to come and see that. And you're just like, it's an experience. People want to go and be a part of it. And so it's something really important. And those are two things I've learned early on during the pandemic, and still hold closely today.
Are there any challenges that keep you up at night?
Imposter syndrome. I have to include imposter syndrome. I think a lot of people experience it and are sometimes afraid that they can't articulate it well, and it's just knowing that, hey, you are doing a good job. It's okay to sometimes think you might not be, or might not be living up to the standards of yourself or others, but you have to keep challenging yourself and keep learning, keep making mistakes, learn from those mistakes, try again. And it ties back into events and experiential and activations. Those are challenges. A lot of times the event world, event folks, event professionals, we get a daily dose of imposter syndrome often. We are thinking, oh my God, what if this event isn't as successful? What if this activation isn't doing what we wanted it to do or was going to do? Or what if the stakeholders aren't happy with it, and you get that daily dose sometimes, and it's up to yourself and hopefully the people around you in your life to kind of bring you out of that too, and know that you have that support.
Has that been something that you've always been aware of, or is it something recent?
It's been there for a long time, but I've certainly been more aware of it and realized that it's an inevitable part of life. I think it's
Mhm.
okay. It's okay to know that you embrace that. There's someone I follow on LinkedIn. His name's Devin Cleary, and he will post like really thoughtful things, and sometimes it's about an imposter syndrome. And I remember I'm just like, wow, that was important. Like that's great to have that information in there, um, to showcase like, hey, this is a normal thing. Like people experience it, and event folks tend to do it. We're talking sometimes 14, 20-hour days because you're planning for an event and you want it to go perfect, and that the little things that are happening behind the scenes are the things that people aren't seeing. They're like, wow, this is a flawless event. But that little fire you're putting out is like, oh my God, the whole thing could go haywire here. But it doesn't. And it's important to realize that.
Is stress a challenge?
It is. But I'm also learning that stress is a natural part of life. You can't avoid it. I have a mentor that once told me, and I apologize if no swearing is allowed on here, but it basically goes, if you are nervous about something, it means you give a shit. And I always liked that because when I started getting into this side of the business, I was afraid of public speaking, and I realized how much I love public speaking now. And it doesn't mean that stress or the anxiety that you get leading up to that point doesn't exist. It's just knowing that if you actually have that stress and that anxiety, kind of lean into it, because that means you actually care about what you're about to do and what you're about to say. And I think that's really important.
Do you have any other suggestions as to how people can deal with stress like that?
Talking it out loud to
Okay.
others, especially in your space. If you're in that space of, let's say, experiential again, and you're stressful about a certain event or leading up to it or something, talking to your peers, talking to the mentors that you have. I'm a huge advocate for mentorship. And I mean that in different phases of your life. When I was a valet at a hotel back when I was like 20 years old, I had a mentor, and she helped me through the stresses of how do I get into doing my marketing thing that I just got a degree in, and then all the way to the different mentors I have now today that are helping me through the stresses of just the nuances of what we're dealing with in the event world and out there in just life itself.
How important is sustainability for you? And does it impact your work?
It's very important, and it should be. At the same time, it's very important to realize sustainability is hard to always practice in our industry. There's different things that we need to put in place, processes, conversations that need to be had to make sure that you can get to being like net zero on wastefulness and everything. At the same time, it's hard because you're creating, let's say, Burning Man in the middle of the desert. Well, it's no trace behind, no trace left behind afterwards. Clean up after yourself, be a part of that community. And that's kind of where that sustainability factor comes from, is everyone has to pick up their own part, has to realize what you're doing can have, consequences later on, but as long as you're doing your part to hopefully bring about sustainability practices into place.
Have you gone to Burning Man?
I have not, and I don't know if I think I'm okay with not going. I think I'm okay with, unless like
Okay.
I could parachute in like how some of those celebrities do, but I don't know.
So we touch upon leadership a bit in our podcasts, and I was interested in finding out from you what are the key qualities or skills that have enabled you to be successful?
Gratitude is one of them. And then another mentor, but also a close friend of mine. His name's Anthony Gomez. He once told me two things that are that are really important to me. So gratitude is the one that I found to be really, like, for me, be grateful for what you get to do. I think a mental shift of saying I have to do something to saying I get to do something is extremely important in leadership. To say I get to be that in this position, or I get to lead these people or this team. But the two things that Anthony mentioned to me was patience and adaptability. And I found that those two are really, really important to being anything into leadership, right? You have to be patient with others, you have to be patient with yourself. And then there's situations and circumstances that are totally outside your control that you have to be okay and adapt to. And that's where I found leadership to be closely associated with those attributes.
So you've mentioned many mentors that have impacted you. Are there any organizations that you've learned from or partnered with that have been key in your career?
I will say from my career thus far, being an independent contractor for many years in my early career, and like now kind of being part of these different agencies, I will say when you look at like associations, like there's one Eland, and then there's another event marketer, all the way to different things like brand innovators. I have a friend there, and these different associations are ones that are helping lead the way of like, wow, I'm learning more and more about whether it's marketing as a whole or whether I'm learning more about events or experiential. And those are the associations I kind of closely tie myself to.
Well, those were all the questions I had. Is there anything I didn't ask that you think is important for people to know about you?
I will say the only thing, I mean, to know about me, come feel free to hop on my LinkedIn or talk to me. I tend to say I'm an open book because of the people that have helped me. I've always thought it's good to go and help others, right? My dad always told me just go and talk to every single person you can. I know we only have limited time in a day, but try to talk to anyone. It doesn't matter who they are, what position they're in. Just try and talk to them, and you probably will learn something, right? So I've just found that that's the case, and hopefully that's what I can,
I love that.
take wisdom onto others.
So we end our podcasts by asking who should be our next guest. And just like Nicola recommended you, I was wondering who you would recommend.
Yeah, I want to recommend. I've talked a lot about mentorship in this, right? I have someone that is from Buffalo, New York as well, and who has been someone who's looked up to me in the experiential space, unofficially, but someone that I'm really, really grateful to say that I kind of unofficially mentor her. And she's recently started her own kind of collective, and it's called the Experiential Collective. And she's also on the events team for Expedia. Her name's Kim True.
Okay.
She is, still relatively getting right into the thick of things of like our space, but she's got a wealth of knowledge. She has that adventurous spirit that as event professionals and experiential enthusiasts have, that's highly important. And she has that knack of knowing like what is a good activation and what means the most for the people that are going to go experience it. So I recommend Kim True.
And what would be one question I should make sure I ask her?
What made experiential marketing reach out to you?
Oh, that's great.
Mhm.
Well, this has been wonderful. I really enjoyed the conversation so much.
Absolutely, Andrea. This was incredible, and I love being able to talk with others, and I love being able to kind of get a more in-depth conversation, certainly about experiential and further than that. So thank you very much.
Great.
Awesome.
Well, we'll keep the conversation going for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.